I want to move to Qubbad now with a question about, I'm going to move a little bit from oil and oil exports to gas, because clearly the world is seeing now, I've been back in the UK and gas prices are awful. The world is realizing the importance of gas as well as crude. The Kurdistan region has traditionally developed a lot of its oil revenues, a lot of its oil fields, and developed a sector out of those. There's a lot of gas potential in the Kurdistan region as well. A lot of that gas is in Sulaymaniyah province. There have been, we can't deny, some political struggles between the PUK and the KDP. What would the PUK like to see in terms of gas development? What's your vision for developing the gas in the Kurdistan region?
I think when we look at gas, we have to learn from experience. And we saw the struggle that we went through for years on the issue of oil and the development of oil and the tensions that arose because of the difference in opinions between Baghdad and Kurdistan. And we don't want to repeat that. We don't have time to repeat that. I don't think anyone can afford to get gas mixed up into a 10, 15-year debate that will require federal court rulings and Paris arbitrations. So we have an opportunity to develop the gas for the benefit of Iraq, first and foremost the people of Iraq and the Kurdistan region, and impact global gas security if necessary. So that's, I think, first and foremost, we need to have a serious conversation with our colleagues in Baghdad. We're in a country that has enormous energy resources, yet we don't have 24 hours of electricity. Yeah. So what sense does it make to talk about exporting gas when our citizens don't have 24 hours of electricity? What sense does it make to talk about exporting gas when we're still using very damaging fuels to power our industrial sector? So I think the strategy has to be Iraq first, citizens first, industry and economy second, and then who knows?
So other parts of the Kurdistan regional government have talked about Europe and replacing Russian imports and pipelines going through Turkey into Europe, and which seems quite a long way off, given that the Dohuk power plant is still sitting there without gas, or it's being fueled on very polluting diesel, and you've got Diyala and things sitting very close to Chamchamal and Sulaymaniyah without gas. So you differ in your view.
Look, I would love to sit here and say we are going to solve the world's energy problems. It's a great feel good, right? You're contributing to global security, you're contributing to... But it's unrealistic and irresponsible to say that.
Right.
Because how can I solve the world's energy needs if I can't solve Chamchamal's energy needs? Right? I have to fix and prioritize our own population first, get 24 hours of electricity, have our industries running on cleaner fuels, develop the economy, and then we can talk about how we can help the rest of the world. And I think this has to be the strategy. And even we will not replace Russian gas in the global market. We cannot. The years it would take to develop the gas sector, the years it would take to build up the capacity necessary, even if that was the government's policy, it's not realistic. The realistic approach, the realistic strategy is, let's have 24 hours of electricity first, let's have clean industry running, let's have jobs, let's have product, domestic product, Let's have a petrochemicals industry. And that's the sensible policy, in my opinion.
So you'd look at exporting gas from Kurdistan region to federal Iraq first?
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Why not? We could convert it to electricity and talk about distributing electricity. There's a whole range of options that are realistic, that are on the table, that are economically viable, that are politically sensible, that are geostrategically necessary, that we need to take into consideration. But that has to happen as a result of a dialogue between the federal government, the regional government, and the relevant actors on this portfolio.
Which isn't happening at the moment.
There's a dance around the subject.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? We're not actually getting to the center. We're tiptoeing as if suddenly everybody's shy. I don't understand it.
Kobat, I want to talk about the oil and gas law. The oil and gas law has not been passed for the past 15 years. It's a law that should govern how revenues from hydrocarbons are distributed between centre and regions. And Erbil and Baghdad have struggled to find a mutually agreeable solution. If in your vision, if you were king and it was up to you completely, what would an oil and gas law look like?
Oh, if I were king, huh?
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Or sultan or something.
We need an oil and gas law. First of all, that is absolutely missing. The recent agreement between the federal government and the regional government is a good agreement, but it's a
stopgap.
It's a stopgap measure,
Yeah.
and it's there to patch up a void in the legal framework. We need an oil and gas law that addresses the several components of it: the management of the fields, the management of the product, export, sale, and revenue sharing. Now, that needs to be done on a national level with regional participation. We must have clarity on our vision vis-à-vis the role of the private sector in the development of the oil and gas sector. And more importantly, we need clarity on how the revenues from the sale of oil and or eventually gas are used to the benefit of the people of the country. So that's what needs to be addressed. It needs a comprehensive law that we need to pass, but it needs to be done realistically. Right? It's not impossible, and I think the goodwill that's been generated from the recent agreement can be a good stepping stone for an oil and gas law, because that's where the real solution lies. Right? And this will be a major simplifier to future budget laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it will give clarity to the private sector and to the companies. It'll give clarity to the markets. People will know what is legitimate, who is authorized to do this. It'll help with transparency.
You mean there isn't transparency at the moment?
It'll help with greater transparency. And it's vital. It needs to be done. And we need to have serious discussions, because this is a national project with regional and international impact.
Have you got any more optimism now than any point in the past 15 years that it can be passed now, given it's been on the table and it hasn't happened for 15 years?
I'm always optimistic,
right,
just by nature, but I think, look, we need to overcome the stigma, and I think to some extent we have, of who sells the oil. Right? We spent so many years arguing about who's selling oil. We didn't argue enough about what to do with the revenues of that oil. And I think if we can now cross this issue, just move on from the issue of fighting over who sells the oil and talk more about what to do with the revenues, the solution is logical. Perhaps we need an amendment to the existing structures, the structure of the marketing organization, right? We probably need controls an oversight on the revenues, maybe include civil society in the process, maybe include environmental agencies into the process. It's not impossible if the intent is there and we're not, fighting over semantics. We can have an oil law that clarifies the role of the federal government, the role of the regional government, the role of the private sector, and more importantly, gives clarity and transparency on the revenues. And then we can really start focusing on the real challenge in the country, which is governance, providing better governance, using the revenue to reinvest back into the infrastructures, using the revenue to solidify the economy of the country so we can have better jobs and more product. So, rather than fighting over the process, let's have a vision on the outcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ali, for your question. It's a very good question, and it's the question that is on the lips of many citizens in Suleymania. The situation in Suleymania is not good. The people of Suleymania are not happy, and there has been a clear dissatisfaction with how the revenues from Kurdistan has been shared and spent in the Kurdistan region, which is why the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, my party, has made it very clear that while we support the negotiations between the federal government and the regional government, and while we support the agreement on the oil law and on the oil portfolio, and we support the passing of a federal budget, we want to make sure that any revenue that comes to Kurdistan is protected and that it is shared equitably and justly across all the provinces of the Kurdistan region, and that revenue no longer becomes a tool to be used for political purposes. So, we want to see a budget law passed, and we'll support a budget law being passed, but we need guarantees in that budget that the revenues are shared and distributed equitably. And we in Kurdistan also need to pass a budget law. We haven't had one since 2013.
10 years now.
So it is time to have our own budget to, again, provide transparency to our public on the public funds. And yes, the delay in export of oil from the Kurdistan region is very damaging. It's damaging to Iraq, it's damaging to the Kurdistan region. We've been deprived of a significant amount of our revenues. 90% of Kurdistan's revenue comes from oil. Now, long term, we need to change this equation, and we need to lessen our dependency on oil. We need other streams of revenue, but the reality is, to get these new streams of revenue, it'll take time and it'll take a lot of effort and more investment. So we need this issue resolved. And again, I personally think that this agreement that has been signed is a very good agreement, so long as it's implemented exactly as it is specified, and that we don't try the old tricks of trying to trick each other or doing something for the sake of mujamala and say, okay, we have an agreement, let's sign this, and then you do your thing and I do my thing, which has happened in the past. If we are serious about this, implementing it to the letter, SOMO is in charge of selling the oil. I have long said it doesn't matter to me who sells the oil. I've made this public for several years now. The important thing is it gets sold, it's transparent, the revenues come back, the revenues are monitored, the revenues are shared equitably, the revenues are put to the use for the benefit of the people of Kurdistan. And then Baghdad is then responsible to provide the Kurdistan region with its full share of the federal budget, and Kurdistan has to uphold its side of the deal in terms of cooperating with the federal government on the export, on the development of the field and of the management of the field. So I'm optimistic, but we are not clear of the problems yet. We still have issues to resolve.
Yeah.